And you can see still quite juicy, still pink in the middle, and yet you have this sort of roasted ring. And it gives us a much more even pinkness throughout and right up to the edge. In the Invoq Oven, we have some cooking functions, one named Delta T and one named Cook and Hold, that have been specifically designed for long, slow cooking, to break down, tenderize meat, ideally cooking overnight, taking cheaper cuts of meat, cooking them slowly with humidity to give a really good finished product in a controlled environment. Now, the way that Delta T cooking works is it is an automatic cooking process that runs based on the core temperature of the meat. So we use the temperature probe, we put it into the meat, and to give an example, let's say for argument's sake, the core temperature of the meat is 10 degrees Celsius. Then the oven will be set at a delta of 20 degrees Celsius, so it will sit 20 degrees Celsius above the core temperature of the meat. So as the meat becomes 11, the oven will become 31, 12, 32. So it will maintain that 20 degrees Celsius above the meat. So it cooks it very, very slowly, very tenderly. The second process, Cook and Hold, works in the same way, but what actually happens is that when it reaches its goal temperature, so let's say for argument's sake, we'd like to cook the meat to 60 degrees Celsius. As it comes up to 60 degrees, then the temperature of the oven will drop and maintain a few degrees Celsius above and a few below, and maintain that 60 degrees Celsius all night long. You can use low fan speed because you're cooking for such a long period of time, which gives you the option to save energy. You can cook with humidity using the injection function so that you don't have to keep the boiler on all evening, which again saves energy, and you can create a controlled environment to keep the meat in a moist environment so that when it comes out, it's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to make a cooking recipe, a program on the oven that we are going to use to cook our beef with the Delta T cooking process. So I'll touch the screen to wake it, press recipes, create a recipe. Now I have to put in the information of the recipe. So the recipe name, I will start with Delta T beef. Then we have the option to put in an image. So if I choose the image, this is our image library. We have numerous images. I'm sure I can find a nice roast beef. I'll use that. Then I have the option to add it to some groups. So I will add it to the beef group and we'll leave it at that. In this oven, we can make as many groups as we like and put one recipe into more than one group. So for example, we might want to add it to a lunch group as well as a meat group. Then we press the tick to save it, Delta T. Now I'm going to add some steps to the recipe. So I'm going to start with a preheat. The reason we do this is because if you always start with the same temperature of oven, then you're much more likely to ensure the same finished product every time. So I want to preheat to 180 degrees and we'll just leave it at 1 minute. So it will take us up to 180 and hold that temperature for a minute before moving on. So I'll save that step. I add one more step. I'm going to put in a note step. This is essentially an alarm, but it also gives us the option of conveying information to the user of the oven. So I have some different icons I can choose. That, for example, is stir, brush the bread, take something out, put something in, but I'm going to choose put something in and use the temperature probe because we're going to be cooking with the temperature probe today. I have the option to put in a note, some information, again, that will be conveyed to the user. So I could put in, for example, remember seasoning, or remember your herbs, or add some extra water to the tray, or whatever. For this, I don't need to worry about anything. I'm just going to use the icon. We'll save that. Then we'll go to the first cooking step. So I'm going to use the convection. What I would like to do is just roast the meat at a high temperature for 10 minutes or so, start the cooking process, but also to make sure that any bacteria inside the cabinet is dead, because we're going to be cooking for quite a long, slow period. It will be in the danger zone, essentially, temperature-wise, for much of that period, and we want to ensure that it's in a safe environment. So I'll leave it at 180 degrees for 10 minutes, 100% fan speed, open exhaust. Then I'm going to add one more step. So once we've actually got that first cooking step done, then we want to lower the temperature. We want to bring the temperature down to an ambient temperature so that we can cook the meat nice and slowly. So I'm going to put in a cool down step. So if I put in a cool down, and I'll bring it down to 45 degrees. Actually, save that. Then I'm going to put in our cooking step. Now for this, I'm going to use a combi step because I want to cook the meat with humidity added to the cabinet. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to create a balanced environment inside the cabinet. So I'm going to add humidity so that if, for example, I cook the meat in a dry environment, then the moisture from the meat will be removed from the meat by the process of osmosis. I don't want to add too much humidity because then what will happen is the meat will essentially boil. We don't want that either. So I want to create a balanced environment so that the meat won't lose any of its own juices. It will cook in its own juice. So I'll choose the combi function, and I'm going to set the combi level to about 40, which is what I've found is a nice level. Then here where I have the time, I'm going to press the temperature probe. Currently it says at 64, but I'm going to press the 3 buttons here. Then I can choose my options of how I want to use the temperature probe. So I'm going to choose Delta T. Once I've chosen Delta T, the temperature box here automatically changes and goes to the Delta T. I'm going to leave it at 20 degrees Celsius, which is the Delta, and I will explain the Delta and how it works shortly. I want a finished core temperature of 58 degrees Celsius, which might be 59, which would be between medium rare to medium. And because we're cooking for a long, slow period, I'm going to lower the fan speed right down to 20%. We don't need the fan speed going fast. That gives us the opportunity to save a lot of energy and cook gently. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll save that. There's all my cooking steps. I don't need anything else. I press the tick to save the recipe and it's ready to go. I have 2 pieces of meat, equal size and weight. I'm going to cook them today. One, I'm going to use the traditional way, hot convection oven, 180 degrees Celsius, using a core temperature, and I'll cook it to about 57 degrees Celsius. We'll take it out and rest it. The second piece of meat, I'm going to use the Delta T process. I have made a recipe on the oven which will give us a preheat, cook at a higher temperature for a few minutes, drop down the temperature in the cabinet to ensure of a sanitized environment. Then we will cook using the Delta T process for a long, slow period of time. I'm first going to weigh the meat just to show that they are equal in weight. So the first piece, we have 1.255 kilos. We'll go into our tray there. And the second piece is 1.250. So almost exactly the same, give or take a couple of grams. I'm going to take some salt, give them a nice bit of love, and some citron pepper. Have a little bit of rosemary oil. Then I will start the oven. I'm going to go to my recipes, so pre-made, choose my groups, beef, Delta T beef. There's all my cooking steps. Start. The oven will preheat. When it's ready, it will ask me to put the meat into the oven, insert the temperature probe, and the oven will do the rest. Here, I'm going to go to a manual mode, 180 degrees Celsius, convection, 100% fan speed, open exhaust, and then we'll compare the results for both weight and tenderness when they're cooked. So now the oven is preheated. It's telling me to open the door, put in the meat. Remember the temperature probe. Release. The meat in. The external temperature probe, always at ambient temperature, so it doesn't score the meat when going in. Push it deep into the middle. Shut the door, let the oven do the rest. Now the oven has preheated and it's telling me to load the product. So I'll put the meat into the oven and again take the temperature probe and that goes into the middle of the meat. Then I'm going to set here temperature probe and then a core temperature of 57 degrees Celsius, 100% fan speed, open exhaust. So that will give us an accurate roast. Now we can see the convection roast, 180 degrees Celsius is finished. It's reached its core temperature of 57 and it's telling me to restart or exit. I'm just going to open the oven using the two-step safety door so I don't get a face full of steam. I'll remove the core probe from the meat. Let's give it a little wipe before returning it, and then we can take out the meat and you can see it's shrunken somewhat in size. So now the oven is telling me that the Delta T cooking is ready. It's flashing. Press finish. It's going to record HOUNÖ. You can see there's way more humidity coming from this cook. I use the two-step safety door to open. Again, remove the temperature probe. Move the meat, you can see it's plumper and there's also some of the natural juice in the bottom of the tray, which we can use for sauces or dressings. I'm going to let that rest, then we'll do the weight test. So now that both pieces of meat have been cooked, we can look at the finished product and we can weigh them and see what's the difference in weight loss between the two cooks. So we're now weighing in at 900 grams. So the original weight was 1.250. So that's 350 grams loss, so nearly over a quarter of its weight, which is quite a fair amount. And then we will weigh the second. So this is the Delta T cooking, and this one was 1.255, and we are weighing in at 1 kilo and 65, so actually 150 grams less weight loss when cooking with Delta T, which is a considerable amount. And we'll also carve the meat, so we can just have a look inside at the finished product. So this was the joint of meat that we roasted in the traditional way, 180 degrees Celsius with 100% fan speed and open exhaust. And you can see still quite juicy, still pink in the middle, and yet you have this sort of roasted ring around the outside, and it's a little tougher than the Delta T piece of meat. And then we'll carve the meat from the Delta T cook. So you can see it's way more juicy. And it gives us a much more even pinkness throughout and right up to the edge.